Hello everybody, welcome back to another reading of the Municipalists by Seth. Owen projected a bulletproof vest onto me with USMS stenciled across the chest in large white letters. Meanwhile, all around the lobby appeared projections of men in SWAT gear with assault rifles. Behind the lobby's information booth, there was even a projection standing behind a chain-fed machine gun. As the doors began to wobble and give away, Owen turned to look at me, making a few small adjustments to my vest. The expression on his face was bittersweet. If they end up shooting you in the head or something, I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure working with you, Henry. I was still processing this sentiment when the doors burst open. Kirkland's men froze when they saw us. The laser sights of Owen's projections were trained steadily on their chests, and Owen himself was standing at the ready with what I was believed to see was a handgun from the century. U.S. Municipal Survey, he shouted. Drop your weapons. 3 men standing toward the front of Kirkland's squad were armed with axes, while the rest were holding rifles in firing positions. Their leader was a young, dark-haired man wearing sunglasses. His new teeth were too large for his slender face, so that his mouth looked full and threatening like a shark's. He glanced down at the initials stenciled on our vest as if he wasn't sure he had heard Owen correctly, and then smiled. So you guys militarized too, huh? He was loosely gripping a handgun and raised it to scratch his temple with the barrel as he looked around the room. Good for you, he said, his tone genuine, as if Owen's SWAT team was the first sensible thing he had come out of Suitland. I suppose you're the ones who've been giving our guys trouble the past few days. A lot of our people are pissed about our friend you threw off the Census Bureau. Very unsporting, but I don't blame you. That's the way it is. To get anything real done, and nowadays you have to kill who you have to kill. Progress is war. Tell your men to drop their weapons, I said. The man raised a palm to show he wasn't a threat, then holstered his weapon. They shouldn't need to, he said. We're outpositioned, and you'll have more firepower. What is that over there, an M60? He pointed toward the information booth and chuckled. Garrett must still be as old-fashioned as ever. Tell him to invest in an M240. Superior reliability. My partner told your men to drop your weapons, Owen said. The man considered this for a moment. You Suitland people never see the big picture, do you? He looked at us almost hopefully, waiting for us to understand what he meant. We're telling you to put your weapons down, I said. Let's try this for starters, he said. We just killed 4 cops outside. Traffic is a nightmare because of the parade, and we have a few teams running interference. But before long, this place will be crawling with MPD, and you may have cleared your request for all this gear with Garrett on the sly. But I'll blow an appropriations committee in hell if he got approval for a tactical assault team from the board. That means the authorities have no idea you're all here playing Army, which also means you couldn't have worked any of this out at the state or city level. As far as the MPD is concerned, you're just another bunch of lunatics with automatic weapons hanging around a couple of dead cops. So you're dealing with the same time constraints we are, and yet you're all just standing around not killing us, which means I don't think you're going to shoot. He took a step forward. Stay where you are, Owen said. The man smiled again, taking another slow and deliberate step in our direction. Feel free to kill me when I get too close. His men began to move slowly into the lobby. This is your last warning, Owen said, his gun shaking in his hand. Kirkland's men continued their advance. Stop right there, Owen said. The panic in his voice was over the top, like a stock coward in an old film. I'll shoot, Owen said. I swear to God I'll do it. He was stepping backwards, his eyes wide with showy fear. Then he stopped, lowered his weapon, and looked off behind Kirkland's men. Wait a minute, he said. What's that? Before they could turn around, an 11-foot-tall clown with long fangs and tentacles for arms sprang up behind them. It let out a piercing shriek and wiped at them with its tentacles, making one of the men lose his balance and fall over, accidentally discharging his weapon and spraying several of his team members with friendly fire. It's worse than we thought, men, Owen shouted to his SWAT team as he motioned for me to withdraw from the room. There's a clown monster. Owen's projections opened fire as we fell back to the natural history exhibit. Kirkland's men retreated into the foyer, dragging their wounded away from the clown and the convincing hail of bullets from Owen's SWAT team. There was a freestanding map of the museum in etched glass that I had assumed was real, but which shattered when the clown picked up one of Owen's SWAT's SWAT team members and tossed him through it, sending a realistic spray of glass across the lobby floor. As the other projections continued to fire, the clown howled in pain and began to drip yellow blood, which bubbled and steamed where it fell. Owen, what is that thing? We were sitting behind the open entryway leading into the natural history exhibit. Claus let me watch some horror movies once in a while. Did you ever see Blood Clown? I shook my head no, and we both turned to watch it as his monster ran screeching across the lobby, its tentacles vibrating and dripping slime. Owen shrugged. It was only okay. In the forest, some of Kirkland's men were administering first aid to their wounded. Others were kneeling by the doorway, awaiting orders and trying to avoid the constant ping and rattle of Owen's fake gunfire as well as the clown's wild charges. Their leader was standing right behind them, taking in the battle between Owen's projection and the lobby with the annoyed look of an intelligent man trying to make sense of something impossible. After the clown uncircumstantially bit off the head of a SWAT team member, the man stepped over one of his wounded and headed out into the lobby. His men watched as he approached. Owen's monster let out a few warning shrieks, but the man continued across the lobby and eventually stepped right through it, waving his hands in front of his face as if he were clearing away a cobweb. He then paused and watched as the SWAT team disappeared. Owen looked disappointed. I was hoping it would take them a little longer to figure it out, he said. In the lobby, the clown stepped back 2 paces so it was once again standing in front of the man. He looked up at it with impatience. It reached one of his tentacles down past the elastic band of its brightly colored pants and pulled out an enormous revolver. It leveled the gun at the man and pulled the trigger. Out of the barrel popped a flag bearing the USMS seal. Bang, the clown said and then vanished, without waiting to see how Kirkland's men would react to this strange display. Owen and I fell further back into the natural history exhibit, where we hid behind a diorama of taxidermied otters. With the front doors of the museum smashed open, music from the parade flooded into the building as Owen mulled over our next course of action. He absently drummed his fingers on his knees to the Beach Boys medley coming from an approaching marching band. I strained to hear any police sirens, but there were none. The group's leader was issuing instructions to his men in Esperanto, which Owen was kind enough to translate in my ear. His translations came off stifled, but it stood to reason that Kirkland's men were new to the language and so speaking in a Pidgin dialect. They are only images, the man said. Lower your weapons so they do not convince you to shoot one another again. We have lost enough colleagues. Owen's face lit up. Hey, he whispered to me, they think you're a projection too. As Kirkland's men entered the exhibit, there was a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. I'll create a distraction, he said. You look for the men carrying a blue duffel. I spotted him in the lobby. Get the bag. I didn't have to ask what was in it. Will a distraction work? I whispered. They know you're a projection. Owen grinned, his features beginning to shift into another disguise. Exactly, he said. He transformed himself into a man with dark eyes and a nose that came to a delicate bird-like point. It took me a second to realize that I was looking at myself. The resemblance was uncanny, except Owen's version of me looked slightly more confident than I did about running into a pack of terrorists and commanding their explosives. We'll take care of everything, he said. You just worry about getting the duffel. He pointed to my right, where 7 copies of me were crouching behind the otter diorama with us. One of them waved. I poked my head up between 2 otters to get a look at the men as they moved through the hall. Their leader still had his gun holstered and was walking confidently at the head of the group with a fire axe in one hand. His men held their rifles with the barrels pointing conscientiously down and away from one another. There was a single unarmed man toward the rear. Howe's left elbow had been bandaged with a necktie that looked soaked through with blood. In his right hand he gripped a large navy blue duffel. That's it for this part. I'll see you guys in the next episode. See you guys later. Goodbye.